few years ago, while searching on X for paranormal or creepy games, I came across an obscure Japanese PlayStation game called LSD Dream Emulator. Despite the game releasing in extremely limited numbers, many ROM sites had it available for download. So naturally, I downloaded it, converted it and started playing. Unfortunately, the ISO was corrupted, or incorrectly ripped, as I couldn't get any further than the title screen, and when I did, all I saw was a mess of colour and heard a strange buzzing sound, a bit like radio static. I tried re-downloading the ISO multiple times, trying it from different websites, but every single one was the same. Strange colours, fuzzy static sound. I tried posting questions on various gaming sites, but hardly anyone had heard the game, let alone even played it. I learned that the game had a cult following, both here and in Japan, and I eventually found a small Yahoo fan group dedicated to the game. I posted a question asking if anyone had managed to get the game working on emulators, and a few days later, I received an answer. Hi, I was one of the members of the ripping group who released the LSD rip. We managed to successfully rip the game, but we've never managed to get it working on emulators, only the original hardware. By this point, I'd practically given up on it. I didn't have a PlayStation console, and my attention span was short, and I had long moved on to other things, like Aversion and Yume Nikki. Then, earlier this year, LSD was released on the Japanese PlayStation Network. I remembered how much I tried to play it, even browsing eBay a few times in the vague hope that a cheap copy surfaced. So, I made an account, bought a Japanese PSN card, and purchased the game. And after downloading and installing, I began playing it. The PlayStation logo came up as usual, but with SCEI instead, as it was a Japanese game. There was no copyright screen, but they'd already removed it from several other games as well. The intro video started playing after that. Different coloured words bounced across the screen, spelling out "linking the sapient dream" multiple times. Apparently, this is what LSD stood for. I pressed the circle button, and the game went to the title screen. There was no press start screen. It just went straight to a screen with 4 or 5 options. Start, save, load, and options. Above start, there was a line of text telling you what day you were on. It displayed a day 1. I chose start. One thing I'd learned from the Yahoo group was that the first day always started in a Japanese house with 3 floors. The contents of the house were random, and the entire game was played in a first-person view. I walked along the hallway and started in, and walked into a bookcase, and the screen faded to white. That's the strange thing about this game. You can interact with anything. Walking into anything moves you to a new area, which is what the game calls linking. The white faded away, and I was in a field. I couldn't see very far into the distance because every area had a fog a few feet ahead of you. The graphics were also basic, with most having no texture to them. I walked onwards, eventually bumping into a tree which sent me to another area. This time, things had gotten a little more sinister. I was in a dark sea, standing on a metal pier. A boat loomed in the fog, out on the water, and lampposts lit the streets. I walked down into the road, and came across alleyways. Graffiti covered some of the walls, strange multicoloured eyes staring out at me. Then, I heard a noise, and the screen flashed quickly. I turned around. Just behind me, a man had appeared. He was wearing a grey hat and a long trench coat. He was walking slowly towards me, almost gliding across the ground. I tried to walk backwards to get away, but my controller wasn't responding, and he was getting closer. For a split second, 2 red dots glared out from under his hat. Then the screen flashed again. This time, I was back in the house. Something had changed though. The textures of the walls were replaced with pictures of real violence. Women being raped, children torn apart, cannibalism, torture, a Japanese man breaking his own fingers with a hammer. As I moved through the house, the pictures slowly began getting worse, and the music began distorting and slowing down. The corridor was longer than it was before, and it was getting darker. I knew what was at the end. He was. I moved onwards, the bile rising in my throat and fighting the urge to vomit. As the pictures began escalating into terrible levels of obscenity and violence. A few steps forward, a man removing a young boy's legs. A few more, a pregnant woman cutting her own fetus out. Further still, a gang of men cut a cow to pieces, wrapping the internal organs around their bodies. Close to the end, people being forced to eat the corpse of a child, vomiting as they eat parts of him. Finally, I reached the end of the corridor. The screen faded to black, and a line of text appeared on the screen. http://oharaweb.weebly.com/lsdgmn.html. I wrote the link down quickly, and a few seconds later, the game faded to white again, and returned to the title screen. This time, the status said DDAY00. I tried to choose start again, but the game wouldn't let me continue. I restarted the PS3 and the status went back to day 0. Before I played it again, I tried the link. It still worked, and a page came up filled with Japanese writing. Further down the page, there was a picture of the Grey Man as he normally would appear. I can't read Japanese, but one of my friends could. He lived in Japan for a few years, so he could read and speak the language fluently. I copied the writing down and called him up. After he showed up, I spent the next few hours telling him what had happened. Obviously, he didn't believe me. Who would? But he still agreed to take a look at the writing on the page. Despite several tries, I couldn't get the webpage up again, so I handed him the copy that I had made. He glanced at it for a few minutes, and then suddenly turned white. He handed it back to me and sat down on the couch. He said nothing for 5 minutes. Then he told me what it said. If you are reading this, well done. You have seen the man as he is. What he did to me as I slept, as I dreamed his dark nightmare. You have also seen it. Those violent images were him. He had no form, only the dream man. He caused all of this, those events in the images. He took those innocents and possessed them. He made them do it. He made me make that game. Grey, 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 grey. As he finished, he stood up and grabbed his coat and said, "Whatever you saw in that game, don't tell me anything about it." And then he left. The next week, he went back to Japan. I couldn't touch another console after that. I destroyed the PS3 and replaced my computer. A few weeks after he left for Japan, I got a call. He had killed a woman, then committed suicide. The woman he had killed? Osamu Sato, and was the lead designer on LSD. I am one of those people who missed out on video games during the earlier era. My parents were very strict about my activities and thought that the video games were the devil. Instead, I grew up doing other activities, like drawing and cooking. I was good at what I had studied during my earlier years. Later, I was able to move out and do things on my own, after 23 years of living at my parents'. Needless to say, I ended up buying some of the older game systems that I'd missed out on. These happened to be the NES, the SNES, and the Sega Genesis. After ordering a bunch of games recommended to me by several people, I went to play through them, and sure enough, I enjoyed most of the games like Super Mario World and Chrono Trigger. After finishing Chrono Trigger, I became interested in RPGs. I went to ask several people if they knew about any RPGs that I might like. Surely enough, I was told about Earthbound, which was a super rare game, usually priced over £100 on eBay. I was unable to afford paying that much, so I decided to go on YouTube and search up a playthrough for Earthbound. I was amazed at what I saw. It was no wonder the game was so popular. A game that took place in the modern setting with an alien invasion. What more could you ask for? I spent the entire day watching the whole playthrough of Earthbound, and became hooked to it despite having seen the entire playthrough of it. Sadly, I wasn't able to find a good deal on the game, and gave up on my hunt for a bit. About a month later, I got lucky. After having been subscribed to a Let's Player that I know very well, he posted a video on YouTube announcing that he was trading a couple of games. One of those games happened to be Earthbound, which was completely boxed. I grew excited and went to talk to him to see if I could get the game off his hand. After making a deal to give up my more valuable games which I had gotten over the past few months, I was finally able to strike a deal. I refuse to give out the name of this person because I know he isn't to blame for what I'm about to talk about. After waiting a few days, the package containing my new game arrived. The box looked to be in perfect condition, something rare for an old game like Earthbound. I opened the box carefully and took the cartridge out, leaving the huge strategy guide in the box. I insert the game into the SNES, flipping on the power switch. I watched the staticky screen form the words, "The War Against Gygus." Afterwards, the intro began to play out, which is where I began to notice something strange. None of the sprites in the game's demo looked cheerful like how they were supposed to. Every character in the game, including the 4 main characters, had been modified to look depressed. There was also no music playing while this happened. Did I get ripped off? Had I got a terrible hack instead? I watched through the whole demo before deciding to go to the menu. After selecting a new file in the main menu, Ness would walk in and carry that saddened expression, which really wasn't even like him. He would carry this expression throughout the whole game, even if you had him riding the bicycle in Tucson. Every other playable character and NPC in the game would have the same expression as well. Despite the sprites having been modded, the game would play normally at this point, making me think that this was a weak hack. I continued playing the game until I got to the part where I needed to save Picky. After leaving my house with Pokey and King, I had my first problem. All of the enemies in the area would try to avoid me and run away the moment they saw me. This would usually happen whenever you beat a boss for that area, but even at level 1, the enemies still wanted nothing to do with Ness. Even if you were to corner them, they would only go right through the wall, all of them also having their sprites modified to look saddened. No matter where you went in the game, you would be unable to fight any of the roaming enemies because they would avoid you no matter how persistent you were. Because of this, it was impossible to even level up. I kept playing, saving Picky and heading back down the hill until I got to the Starman Jr. After being threatened by him, Starman Jr. immediately disappeared and Buzz Buzz continued his dialogue as if Ness had just beaten him. This was another problem with the hack. It would skip the boss fights as well. After going in Pokey's house, the same theme that would usually play in the area wasn't there. Instead, it was just silence like the opening demo. After Pokey's father ended up catching the two going out, he sent them upstairs to scold them like in the original game. There was a difference here. After Pokey's dad went upstairs, an odd sound effect was supposed to play, but instead, there was what sounded like crying from a child in distress. After seeing Buzz Buzz get smashed by Pokey's mum, I went to talk to him. What Buzz Buzz had to tell me was different than his usual speech in that part of the game. Buzz Buzz began to talk to me about how I wasn't the chosen one and how the whole world couldn't be saved. Before fading away, Buzz Buzz still handed me the Sound Stone. During this whole scene, he acted like there was a much bigger threat than Gygus, who was of course the antagonist of the game. At this point in the game, everything played like it was supposed to, despite the lack of being able to fight enemies and the depressing sprites. I made it to the giant step, which was supposed to be the first sanctuary location in the game. After going to the record location, I headed back down. During the middle of my trip back, the game started to lag. The lag was awful. It caused the game's music to act up, along with my character moving slower than before. After trying to get Ness to leave the area, a blue swirl appeared letting me know that I had hit an enemy. I thought it was one of those black Antoid enemies, due to how tiny they were on the map. But it turned out to be a much different enemy. It looked to be a blue recolored smiling sphere from the Dusty Dunes Desert, an area found later in the game. Only it looked just to be a blue orb without the smiley face on it. Was this supposed to be a new enemy added into this hack? The battle message popped up saying, "Friend begins to form around you." The music playing during this fight was the unsettling theme that you would hear when Pooh meditated around Dalam. Then another message immediately popped up asking me a question that I didn't know the answer to. Where's Jacob? This text moved very slowly, like how Gygus would talk to you during the fight against him. But who was Jacob? I remember viewing that Let's Play of Earthbound and never saw that person finding anyone called Jacob in the game. There was a lack of background in the battle, with it only being a black screen. I thought this was just an Easter egg put into the game by the hacker. I ended up only doing a few points of damage to the thing. It would then repeat its question, asking me where Jacob is. I grew frustrated after about 10 minutes of trying to kill the thing and getting nowhere. I decided to run away, but this wouldn't be the last time I would encounter this thing. The further I got in the game, the more frequent I would encounter a friend. After having gotten to Tucson and going to the Polestar preschool, the game lagged again like it did back at the Giant Gap. Soon enough, the blue swirl appeared and I encountered Friend again. This time, I just ran away. Because it was an invisible enemy on the map, the only way you would know it's around is when the game started to lag. The third time I encountered Friend was still at Tucson, but I forgot where. When I got into this encounter, I noticed that the background was completely different. Instead of the background being plain black, this time, it was completely white. Just as I was about to run away, I saw something disturbing float across the screen. It was a silhouette of what looked to be a deformed child, but it was hard to tell. I began to feel uneasy as I watched the thing float across the screen. I wanted to get out of there, but I was unable to do so on my first try. Afterwards, Friend began to ask me where Jacob was over and over again, till the whole text box was filled with the question, which took forever. When I tried to run away, I was able to get away, which was a relief to me. At this point, I wanted to try and finish the hack as quickly as possible. The only way I could progress any further was to sell the items I found in the gift boxes, so I could pay Applekid the $200 he needed. This was because I was still unable to fight anything. I played through, rescuing Paula and getting rid of the zombies in Threed. I was still getting attacked by the persistent Friend enemy, but there was nothing of interest except I found myself having trouble escaping from the fight more I ran into him. I also ended up running into him twice while I was heading back to Threed from Saturn Valley. The game was going very fast due to its nature of skipping boss fights. I was about to end at my favourite city in the game, which was Fourside. I thought it was at least worth playing up to this point, but I was sadly mistaken. If you were to get to this part in the hack, it would be impossible to progress any further. When I entered Fourside, I tried talking to an NPC, resulting in some familiar dialogue. Where's Jacob? I began to feel spooked trying to talk to everyone else, but they would only ask me the same question. I tried to go see the Runway 5, but was unable to get a ticket because of being asked that damn question, with no option of buying a ticket. I wanted to leave the city and go back to check on Threed. As I tried to head back, the game began to seriously lag, which made me know it was coming. When I got into the battle with Friend this time, I noticed the background to be all staticky. If you were to look carefully, you would see all kinds of deformed looking silhouettes in the background, with some of them not even looking human. This time, it took a very long time to run away, but after about 8 tries, I was finally able to do so. When I got back to Threed, I was still being asked about Jacob, and I knew what I had to do. I turned off the power to the game, and then turned it back on in the hopes that it would fix the issues with the NPCs. When I got back to the main menu, I noticed that my data had been erased. I was pretty annoyed, but I noticed another file that I hadn't seen before. I realized that I started a new game so quickly the first time that I didn't even see this file. It turned out that the file was of a level 43 save, with the file name being Jacob. Was this who Friend was referring to the entire time? It seemed like Jacob had played through half the game, but decided to stop around level 43. I knew it was a bad idea to select this file, but I did so anyway. When I loaded the file, I was in Ness's house with the theme playing for it. Ness was also alone, and didn't have any party members to help him. There was a huge difference this time around. The home was completely wrecked, with most of the furniture and walls looking to be mouldy. Everything looked to be completely ruined, as if it had been a century since someone had come to this place. I wanted to go speak to my mother in the game and see if she was still alright. That turned out to be a big mistake. After getting to the staircase, I saw the skeleton of my mother laying on the floor. I began to get scared at how dark this was and left the house as quickly as possible. When I left my home, I saw that Onette didn't look any better. The outside of the house looked like it needed to be condemned right away. The grass was brown and looked lifeless, while the trees looked bare and dried up. There was also no music playing in the background, which fit very well for what I was seeing. I didn't even know if I wanted to see how the rest of Onette looked, but I decided to go towards town anyway. On my way to Onette, I saw another horrifying sight laying on the ground. On the ground were the bones of what used to belong to various spiteful crows. I left the scene and heard the music to Onette slowly pick up. This wasn't the cheerful music that I was familiar with. The instruments sounded very old, as if the musicians were struggling to even play them properly. It sounded very depressing and it put me on the edge of tears. There was also no one in town, just the skeletons of the people who used to live here. This is what I was afraid of. I was unable to get into some of the buildings because some of the skeletons were blocking the doors. There were a couple of places I could get into, but none of them had anything of interest and looked no better than how my place looked. When I wandered around the ruins of what used to be Onette, a message box popped up. Do I still have a purpose? After this, the game began to lag, and it was the worst lag I'd experienced. After the lag stopped, I got into another encounter, and at this point I knew exactly who it was. Friend. This time, the background was complete static, and none of the silhouettes from before could be seen. The music was also changed from when Gygus was close to being defeated. Friend was grey now, as opposed to being blue. Because I was level 42 in this save, I tried to attack Friend and was able to deal a bit more damage to him this time. Because of this, I wanted nothing more than to put that thing out of its misery. Friend didn't even try to ask me where Jacob was, but instead did nothing and would only cry throughout the whole battle. After a couple of rounds, I got another message. Do I no longer have any purpose? I continued to try and damage Friend until it gave me one last message. Farewell, Jacob. Friend then began to disappear like any other enemy would in the game. Afterwards, I was returned to Onette without even a message telling me that I had won. I found myself unable to even move my character and just stood there. After 20 seconds, the game completely froze and the screen went black, staying that way. I took the game out and tried to blow on the cartridge, but it wouldn't play. After trying to get the cartridge to work about 3 more times, I gave up. And to be honest, I was glad it was all over. I had one more thing to take care of. I went to contact the person who'd done the trade with me for this messed up hack. I was furious and demanded answers, telling him what I'd just experienced, but I left out some of the things in fear that he would think I was a complete lunatic. He told me then that he was sorry and that he hadn't checked the game because he didn't want to open the box it came in. He told me he would give me back my games since he'd gotten the box for free from someone who didn't even want the game anymore. Was this person Jacob? I guess I'll never know. Since I felt bad, I offered to take back half the games I'd trade him, since I knew it wasn't his fault entirely. He told me I could just keep the game since it was worthless. So I did. I went to put it back in the box it came in, but I saw something that gave me shivers. The box that looked perfect before was now completely torn and looked to be mouldy, as if it had been kept in a bad area for so long. The player's guide wasn't any better. Most of the pages had been torn out, and any of the pages that were remaining were now unreadable. I threw everything out that I had gotten on that day. This file was found on a laptop belonging to a retired government official. Anyone familiar with creepypastas throughout history would recognize the cabinet Polybius was an addictive game thought to have been developed by the government to test mind control technology. December the 4th, 2003. So excited. I found the cabinet. It's in good condition, just dusty. Polybius. Such a majestic cabinet. So simplistic. This will be my masterpiece. 10th of January, 2004. Disaster. I've been toying with the cabinet, getting it prepared. The wires are corroded. The cabinet and its contents are still intact, but I've not been able to get it to play coin operated. Now I know why. The wires leading from the mechanism to the motherboard are corroded beyond repair. Luckily, it was just on one side. I can replace the wire, but the materials I need are expensive and scarce. Referring back to the blueprints, I find that I need silver wires. Silver! But it will be worth it. 15th of January 2004. I've done it. The game is fully functional. Every side repainted and restored. Every wire resoldered. Every part perfect. I got my nephew to play it and I verified that it is an original. He can't sleep. He doesn't think I know. But I do. He sneaks into my workshop at night for a fix. Another round of this wonderful game. I can't wait. I just can't wait until my own additions have been added. 20th of January 2004. It's been completed. I've added in the wiring and locked the coin slot shut to prevent further tampering until my plan is underway. I've already contacted the local arcade about renting out the cabinet. My nephew threw a huge fit when I told him that he couldn't play anymore. I can't let this be traced back to me. 23rd of January 2004. He finally got over it, I think. He's much calmer now, even though I didn't let him play. He asks about it still, like asking about a girl at school. It's cute, like he's got a crush on my cabinet. 24th of January 2004. Little bastard. He played it. He broke into my workshop and cut the lock with bolt cutters to get into the game himself. He must have been watching me install my hardware. He played it, and when I walked in on him, he ran. I removed the power supply and it's currently in a box under my bed. Just hope it doesn't affect him. 26th of January 2004. Killed himself. Didn't leave a note. Just offed himself with his shoelaces in the closet. I don't think they suspect a thing. He was a troubled kid. He didn't have any friends, but I feel horrible. The funeral is next week. Was it because of the game? Dear God, I hope it's not that strong. I hope that this was just the final straw for him. 12th of February 2004. I never should have played it myself. I was so curious as to what could have caused him to kill himself. Was it that fantastic? Was it such an ecstatic feeling that one would kill themselves rather than do without? I found out. I played it. The game itself wasn't too interesting, but I lost myself in the colours, the spinning shapes, the beauty. I came away from the 5-minute session with a buzz not unlike that of sex, but so much stronger. So much stronger that even now I'm itching to play it again. I must. Don't want to, but I must. Is this how addicts feel? 15th February 2004. I'm so near my goal, but I don't want to give it up. It's mine. I don't care if my wife feels like I'm spending too much time in my workshop. I didn't even come to bed last night. I actually haven't even slept in days. I can feel my mind fraying at the edges. I never should have played it. It's mine. 21st of February 2004. My wife sold the game. She sold it to the arcade that I was going to sell it to. I got so angry. I hit her with a wrench. She's bleeding, and she's on the ground, and she won't wake up. I'm so scared. Why did I do that? Why did she have to sell it? Why? I wish I hadn't played it. I can feel the want, the need filling me like ants crawling into my skin. It's starting to hurt. Physically hurt. I can't even go outside in the day. It's just too bright. The stars are bright through my sunglasses. I have to go bury my wife now. I'll go to the arcade and post more soon. 2nd of March 2004. It hurts, but I can handle it. I have an old friend who sold me 2 bags of an amazing drug called OxyContin. The pain is less, but I can't make it stop unless I stop at the arcade. I noticed that there was a long line at the arcade, 6 or 7 people waiting in front of me to play. At least I know I'm not suffering alone. 5th of March 2004. Mother-in-law showed up today. She hasn't heard from Molly in a few days. I told her that we had a fight and she left. Not exactly a lie, but she bought it. She never much liked me, my Molly. She assumed that she'd be back in a few months. She's done it before, and it gives me time to decide what my plan is. I just realised that the cut I'm getting from the arcade owner for the cabinet is just going right back into the cabinet. He says I should get a cut because I brought him his most popular game. The crowd around the machine is like a crowd of addicts, tired, haggard, all with the same knowing expression and greedy hands when I bring them a bag of quarters. I wish I'd destroyed the damn thing when my nephew had died. 8th of March 2004. The drugs have stopped working. Originally, I was just using the OxyContin to stop the pain from getting too much to bear so fast, with maybe one arcade visit every few weeks. But the drugs have started wearing off. I can't help but go almost every day now, and I can't take any more of these pills without hurting myself. I'm gonna try buying back the cabinet tomorrow. 10th of March 2004. I talked to the owner about buying the game back, and he told me in no uncertain terms to fuck off. I told him I needed it, that he had no idea what it was like to play this game. I spilled my guts on how I was going to use the old programming. The programming I'd researched in my time at the Pentagon that drew people in for that experiment, and of the results in Maine. I was just wanting to make a quick buck renting out an addictive game at his store and pulling it in a 50-50. He wasn't mad, he was just more adamant that he wanted to keep it. He didn't give me any quarters either. Greedy fuck. 20th of March 2004. I've done it again. I was at the machine playing it when he tapped me on the shoulder and told me he was closing for the night. I wasn't finished. He tapped me harder, then pushed me when I ignored him. And I don't know what came over me. 1 second, I was looking at this fat Italian, and the next, I was sitting on top of him with my hands around his throat and he wasn't moving. I killed him. I turned around and smashed the screen of the machine with my fist, and ripped the motherboard out and snapped it in half. I'm at the end of my rope. The pain is returning, and I can't bear it for much longer. If anyone finds this diary, make sure it goes public. I'm leaving this text file open on my computer while I play a few rounds of roulette with my revolver. I'm sorry. I never should have done it. I'm coming, Molly. I hope you'll forgive me. I should have just killed that damn Mungo. They've never been anything but trouble. Everything was fine until he showed up. He came walking in, a sword strapped across his back, 2 different pistols in holsters on each side of his waist, and a dog following him. He was dressed up in this long trench coat, a cowboy hat and sunglasses on his head. I stopped him near the gate, like all the others. He says he just wants to get to the vault, nothing else. Yeah, right. I tell him what I tell the others. No Mungos allowed inside. He kept arguing, saying he needed to get what was inside, saying that he could pay before storming off. A few days later, Sammy and Squirrel, who had been taken by slavers, show up. They were in bad shape, but they were alive, and that was reason enough for celebration. They tell us the story of how this other kid called Brian got put in there with them one day. He said he was from somewhere called Greyditch. It was being attacked by freaky ant things that spat fire. He was running from them, trying to find help, when one of the slavers must have caught him. Thing is, Brian's collar was damaged. Squirrel was able to mess around with it, eventually finding out how to deactivate them. Then, under the cover of night, the 3 of them made their escape. They got out of Paradise Falls through a sewer pipe, but then popped out near some slaver on patrol. Brian throws himself at the guy and tells them to run, and they ran. There was talk about going back for Brian, but I pointed out that he was probably dead by now. Sammy and Squirrel insisted on going anyways, but they were in no shape for a rescue operation. I had to beat that point into them, but a leader's got to look out for those under his care. 3 days ago, who should show up but Brian? Sammy and Squirrel were ecstatic. The kid was in even worse condition than they were when they showed up. I thought he'd bleed to death, but Lucy managed to patch him up. He didn't talk much, just said that he managed to knock the slaver out cold. That night was when it happened. I'd woken up to let Dale get some sleep, but he was already dead. Brian was there with a knife. He looked at me, frowned, and opened the gates before slicing his own throat. Before I could do anything, a bunch of slavers were everywhere. Zip tried to jump on one of them, but he got whacked on the head and carried off. Angela kept yelling at them until she was hit with the butt of a rifle. Billy managed to kill one of the slavers, but his head got blown off. I can still see that brief look of terror in his eyes before they shot out his sockets. Me, Lucy, and Eclair tried to keep them from the Great Chamber, where most of the others were hiding. But we were overwhelmed. I struggled with one of them, but there was a flash of light, and it was over. I woke up the next day with a collar around my neck. All the other kids and I were crowded into this cage. One of the slavers, Eulogy Jones, was talking about how we were a great catch, and his men would be swimming in gold. That's when I saw him. That same Mungo that showed up at the entrance over a week ago was with him. I blew a fuse at the sight of him, and then started thrashing at the gates, trying to get close enough to beat him to a pulp. The Mungo just walked over, looked me in the eyes, smiled, and punched me in the groin. The next 2 days were a nightmare. Anyone who spoke up was beaten. Joseph got locked in the box. Lucy, Angela, Knock Knock, Bumble, poor Bumble, were taken one at a time to the slaver's bunker. None of them would talk about what happened. They just sat in a corner together, recoiling at the sight of a slaver. Knick-Knack was the first one sold, but the others would follow. I can't stand it anymore. I am Mayor Robert Joseph McCready. The kids of Little Lamplight are under my protection. Tonight, I'm breaking into their armory. I will murder every last one of those slavers and lead my people back home. And if I ever see a Mungo again, there will be hell to pay. The child lays on the ground before him. Even in death, there was nothing but pure hatred on his face. Perhaps this was for the better. McCready was a leader, a paragon for the other kids. With him dead, the rest would learn their place. They would cause no trouble once his body was put on display. Secure in the knowledge that no one would ever find out about his part in things, the lone wanderer left once more to Little Lamplight. I was big into BBS, bulletin board systems, and the Ware scenes back in the late 80s. The internet before the World Wide Web, basically. Call it piracy if you want. That's what it was. And we were dumb kids looking for free games, swapping downloads on message boards, running up phone bills and swapping and copying our floppy disks. Now, I played all kinds of games, but my favourite were RPGs, especially Wizardry and Ultima. This was about 89, about a year after Ultima 5 came out. During one of our floppy trading parties, my friend Jeff, who went by the handle Lord Camaro, took me aside and pulled out a pile of 7 5¼ inch floppy disks, all marked with Abyss in the black marker, which wasn't an uncommon way to label your wares back in the day. He said he got it from a BBS he called up in Texas. Ultima developer Origin Systems was based in Texas, so we figured it might be the real deal. It's called Abyss, but I think it might be a prototype of Ultima 6. He went on to explain that I could use my same character from Ultima 4 and 5, but warned me that it was a very strange take on the Ultima formula. That didn't surprise me. Ultima 4 and 5 had completely different twists on the previous Ultima games, so something new could be expected. I took the discs home and booted them up in my Commodore 64. As opposed to the adventurous theme that Ultima 5 started with, Ultima Abyss had a quiet and mournful theme. I began the game and imported my player from Ultima 5. There was a counterpoint in the theme, in a sinister minor key. The game began with the avatar being ushered through a moon gate and onto a ship bound for Britannia. While he was accompanied by old friends like Lolo and Dupree, the companions' portraits all looked aged and thin. Janna seemed the thinnest and most drawn of them all, and she explained that Lord British had fallen ill with a mysterious disease and seemed to be descending into madness. She began to explain more about his delusions, but the ship struck a whirlpool, and I had to watch helplessly as my companions sank into the water. The screen faded to black, and my character washed up near the shores of Britannia. I guided my character into the castle, where the citizens were unwilling to talk, regardless of my mastery of the virtues. They all seemed to believe Lord British was dying, but were unwilling to say it for the fear of what might happen. I decided to press the matter and seek an audience with the monarch anyway. Lord British failed to recognise the avatar, saying, "Whisk this boastful fool from my sight. I know him not," and only able to repeat that phrase. After speaking to his guards again, he ordered my character to be sent to the dungeons. There was little to do in the dungeon. My only options were rest and talk to the jester. Every time I rested, the status read, 1 year later. I must have rested 40 times. By the 15th or so time, the jester had been replaced with a skeleton. I clicked through my inventory and stats. My stats decreased, and the robust young avatar faded to a scraggly husk of an old man. I was beginning to grow frustrated when a guard appeared at the door of the cell and brought my character to Lord British, who said that he would release the avatar from prison if he hunted down the traitors that had once been his companions. He gave no instructions on where to find them, but that was quite typical of RPGs of the time. The first I ran into was Shamino, who had recently resurfaced in the Buccaneer's den. I didn't even bother talking to him. I merely attacked. All other characters in the town panicked and cleared out. There was no battle. I simply attacked him, and the stats field gave a disturbingly detailed account of the Avatar mutilating his former friend. I proceeded to find and slay the rest of the companions in short order. It seemed almost as wherever I went, they were programmed to appear. When all were thought to be dead, the guard appeared again and escorted me back to the dungeon, saying that he was waiting for a pardon from Lord British. The jail guard appeared once more. Lord British has passed. He hath not an heir, but a final request for the Avatar. Lord British's last command was to descend once again to the Stygian abyss and cast the Codex of Ultimate Wisdom, the magic tome that could always provide a just answer, into lava in the deepest pits of the abyss. The guard seemed possessed. He pushed my character to a waiting ship bound for the abyss, but uttered, "I hope you fail," as his bon voyage. And the strangeness continued. My old avatar in rags and armed only with rusted weapons descended into the abyss. Rather than to be hampered by the series' traditional enemies, they aided the Avatar's quest. Balors were only too happy to push stalactites over to bridge gaps. The game proceeded easily. Reaching the pit at the bottom of the abyss was insultingly easy. I dragged the codex out of my inventory, and then the game froze. Glitched. It returned to normal after the disk drive stuttered. A ragged Dupree followed close behind and questioned the Avatar. He asked how one who had mastered virtue could be so easily commanded by a man whose mind had been corrupted. The game then pitted the Avatar against Dupree. Dupree emerged victorious against my frail and atrophied Avatar. He took the Codex, and as punishment for the Avatar's crimes and his wish for the people of Britannia not to know what a monster he'd become, walled the Avatar into a cell that was identical in size to the one in Britannia's castle. The game again gave the options to rest and talk again, even though there seemed to be no one to talk to. Talking revealed the dialogue from nowhere in particular. "Thy fate is to starve here, die forgotten and alone." By this point, I'd had enough of what must have been an elaborate prank. I turned the Commodore 64 off and tried to leave my bedroom. The door was stuck. I jiggled the lock like there was no tomorrow. I bashed the door with my shoulder. It didn't so much as shudder, much less open. I sat on my bed, and the dot matrix printer began to roll out line after line. "Die forgotten and alone," interspersed with words monster and traitor in lowercase. Paper rolled off the printer in reams, and when it reached the last scrap, the final words printed is your freedom worth the price paid?" I turned my Commodore back on, and went about the business of reformatting all the discs. The process was slow, and the room seemed cold as I went to work. The first game popped out of the drive. The label was stripped from the disc. I later found it in the drive. But this was the only time that ever happened to one of my discs, before or since. I finished reformatting the discs. I felt as if they had been exercised, like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I never mentioned Abyss again to my BBS buddies, and my interest in the scene fell by the wayside when I went to college in the mid-90s. It's also worth knowing that Ultima 6 did not resemble Abyss in any way, leading me to think that it was an early mod. This was, I thought, the end of the affair. A while later, I saw the nickname Lord Camaro on a forum. I sent him a DM, and lo and behold, it was my old BBS friend, Jeff. We started talking again, reminiscing about the good old days, and one day, we were talking about Ultima in Skype, and I brought up Abyss. Jeff went silent for a while, and then said, "I knew we'd end up talking about this." There had apparently been more to the game, Unlike me, Jeff's avatar had been strong enough to kill Dupree. The avatar dropped the codex into the lava, and the guard from earlier returned, facing the avatar. The screen faded to black, and the screen said, "You are free of your responsibilities, of your morals, and your friends. Revel in thy freedom, avatar." He said the game then cut to the avatar wandering the overworld. He could visit all the towns in the game, but few people would speak to him, and those that would expressed fear at his return. He explored the world and found Britannia's castle to be empty. The throne room was empty, except for a decaying corpse in the seat, and when he examined it further, the skeleton crumbled to dust, revealing a hollow in the base of the throne. Inside was a cloak with holes ringed with blood, a dagger crusted with blood, and a cracked skull with a piece of parchment rolled in an eye socket. He removed the parchment, and it read simply, "I am not myself lately, Lord British." After he found the parchment, his discs erased themselves, even the ones that weren't in his drive at the time, or so he told me. He also said he tried to call up the BBS he downloaded it from, but it was disconnected. We wrote Abyss off as a very strange early attempt at a total conversion mod. It hasn't been mentioned much since, and neither of us has ever seen any reference to it outside of our own experiences. Sometimes, I even think it was a joke that he played on me. But if you went to that much trouble, why only me? We were acquaintances, but he knew a lot of other people too. He said he'd traded it around to other people but hadn't heard from them. The genesis of Abyss is a total mystery. There isn't really any documentation of it online. If anyone has heard anything about it, I'd love to solve that mystery. Have you ever wondered why Doug Ratman, the person in the game series Portal, who survived GLaDOS' neurotoxin attack and makes all of the scrawlings on the wall to help the main character, is never anywhere to be physically found in the game? Well, if you do, I have an answer. I also have an answer to the question, will Shell return if they make a third game? I can guarantee the answer is no. The story begins on Black Friday of 2017. I was with my family at Walmart looking through some of the video games. I mostly just saw new stuff like Madden 18 or Battlefield 1. As I looked through games on the Xbox 360 rack, I saw something. It was Portal 2. I'd heard so much about the game and wanted to own a copy bad. I looked at its tag. It had the yellow tag, which meant that it was only $10. We ended up getting the game as an early Christmas present. Me and my sister Chloe immediately started it up and played through a bit of the co-op. It was fun, and I wish it would have never ended. Eventually, she got tired of the game, so I was left with no other choice but to play the single player. I got hooked onto the single player instantly, right at the start with the relaxation vault being lit and well kept. As I continued through the story, up until test chamber 4 of the courtesy call, everything went normally. But then, I decided to start exploring. I saw a little opening in the wall after falling onto the glass, and went through it thinking that this was the right way. But instead, it led me to an office with weird scrawlings on the wall. Most of it was unreadable, but one part was very clear. In red paint, the word Unreason was written. This was freaky to me. I decided to look up what this was. After scrolling through some things, I came to the conclusion that this was one of the rat dens in the game. For those of you who are like me and don't know what the rat dens are, they're rooms with markings on the wall, cans of paint and beans, and some even with radios or messy beds. So, I went through the game looking for more. After 3 more dens, I started to see a bit of a pattern to where they were. It seemed that each chapter, except for the courtesy call, had at least 2 dens, but in chapter 2, something weird happened. I was in the last test before the end of the chapter, when I somehow found a way into another den. It was odd, as I thought that chapter 2 only had 2 of these. But this one was different. Instead of the normal tiny office room that they normally were, this one was a long hallway. There were no beams, paint cans or beds on the floor like the others had. On the walls though, it looked like any other den. It had a bunch of scrawlings on the walls, just like the others. Instead of most of the scrawlings being unreadable, these ones were clear. On one wall, it was, "The cake is a lie," over and over, endlessly it seemed, as I couldn't see the end of the hallway. On the other, it was something that I only realised after looking up. The entire Lab Rat comic published by Valve. I tried to save the game at this spot, but it didn't work, which I found kind of odd, as it normally autosaves every time you find one of these dens. I knew this one wasn't supposed to be in the game. It seemed as if the game was trying to tell me something. So, I finally got up enough courage to walk down the hallway. The same things kept coming, the left wall having "The cake is a lie," and the right displaying the rest of Lab Rat. This kept happening for a solid hour. The comics kept coming in order, and the cape kept being a lie with every step. After the last page of the comic happened, the hallway went pitch black. This made me freak out, as I was playing this game in the middle of the night. Then a light appeared at the beginning of the end of the hallway. This really made me freak out, as I knew there was only one other thing that could be producing that kind of light. I walked to it, and as I got closer, what I feared was a reality. It was an incinerator. I knew that something was wrong now. I've seen playthroughs of the game, and not one person has featured this room, or an incinerator. I've even read on one site that Valve had gotten rid of the mechanic for Port 2. So the fact that there was one in this room, that I don't even think should be here, was shocking. I walked forward, and behind the incinerator was one final message. I can only assume that it was from Doug Ratman. "Well, you have found this secret den. So secret even the devs don't know it exists. So now that you have found this place, I will reveal why you never see me. The truth is, I jumped into this very incinerator once GLaDOS came back online. I was scared, and I couldn't go through this. Not again. So now, I give you a choice, Alex. Will you follow me, or continue your fight?" This blew my mind, and it nearly made my heart stop. I can't believe that this game, this Doug Ratman, knew my real name. I didn't even notice right away that before Shell, there were 2 buttons displayed on the screen, with 2 choices beside them. The first was X, and it was to continue the game. The other was Y, and it was to commit suicide. I tried to turn off my Xbox so I didn't have to make this choice, but it wouldn't turn off. I changed the output to TV, but the game still displayed. I eventually ran upstairs to watch Netflix, but then the game flicked onto my screen the second it came on. It even displayed on my phone when I tried to look at it. I had to make the choice. While I wanted to continue the game and get rid of this glitch or hidden area or something, a part of me said, "Kill Shell." A part of me overcame, and I clicked Y. Shell jumped into the incinerator without hesitation. I was falling to the bottom. Before the game cut to black, the song that was supposed to be used for an alternate ending before it was scrapped, Exile Vilify, was playing as the following things burned with Shell. A cake, a weighted companion cube, the cause from the last game, and most disturbing of all, Doug Ratman in a polygon form. The screen cut to black, and the credits rolled. It was at this point that I realised that the ending I'd heard of where shells suffocate in space, the one that got scrapped, was as much of a lie as the cake. This was the scrapped ending. How do I know? After the final screen, Exile Vilify still playing in a continuous loop was a series of text. It was Doug's most famous line, followed by In Loving Memory, at the bottom with his picture from Lab Rat. Quote was, "Reality is the story the mind tells itself, an artificial structure conjured into being by the calcium ion exchange of a million synaptic firings. A truth so bizarre that it can only be lied into existence, and our minds can lie. Never doubt that." I've never left that screen since. In the last decade and a half, it's become infinitely easier to obtain exactly what you're looking for by way of a couple of keystrokes. The internet has made it all too simple to use a computer to change reality. An abundance of information is merely a search engine away, to the point where it's hard to imagine life any different. Yet, a generation ago, when the words streaming and torrent were meaningless, save for conversations about water, people met face to face to conduct software swap parties, trading games, and applications on Sharpie labelled 5 1/4 inch floppies. Of course, most of the time, the meets were a way for frugal, community-minded individuals to trade popular games, like King's Quest and Maniac Mansion amongst themselves. However, a few early programming talents designed their own computer games to share amongst their circle of acquaintances, who in turn would pass it on, until, if fun and well designed enough, an independently developed game had its place in the collection of aficionados across the country. Think of it as the 80s equivalent of a viral video. Pale Luna, on the other hand, was never circulated outside of the San Francisco Bay Area. All known copies have been long disposed of. All computers that have ever run the game now detritus, buried under layers of filth and polystyrene. This fact is attributed to a number of rather abstruse design choices made by its programmer. Pale Luna was a text adventure in the vein of Zork in The Lurking Horror, at a time when said genre was swiftly going out of fashion. Upon booting the program, the player was presented with a screen almost completely blank, except for a text. You're in a dark room. Moonlight shines through the window. There is gold in the corner, along with a shovel and rope. There is a door to the east. Command? So began the game, that one writer for a long out-of-print fanzine decried as enigmatic, nonsensical, and completely unplayable, as the only commands that the game would accept were pick up gold, pick up shovel, pick up rope, open door, and go east. The player was soon presented with the following: reap your reward. Pale Luna smiles at you. You are in a forest. There are paths to the north, west, and east. Command? What quickly infuriated the few who've played this game was the confusing and buggy nature of the second screen onward. Only one of the direction decisions would be the correct one. For example, on this occasion, a command to go in a direction other than north would lead to the system freezing, requiring the operator to hard reboot the entire computer. Further, any subsequent screens seem to merely repeat the above text, with the difference being only the directions available. Worse still, the standard text adventure commands appeared to be useless. The only accepted non-movement related prompts were use gold, which caused the game to display the message, not here. Use shovel, which brought up not now, and use rope, which prompted the text, you've already used this. Most who played the game progressed a couple of screens into it before becoming fed up and having to constantly reboot and tossing the disc in disgust, writing off the experience as a shoddily programmed farce. However, there is one thing about the world of computers that remains true. No matter the era, some people who use them have way too much time on their hands. A young man by the name of Michael Nevins decided to see if there was more to Pale Luna than what met the eye. 5 hours and 33 screens worth of trial and error, and unplugged computer cords later, he finally managed to make the game display different text. Text in this new area read, "Pale Luna smiles wide. There are no paths. Pale Luna smiles wide. The ground is soft. Pale Luna smiles wide. Here. Command?" It was another hour still before Nevin stumbled upon the proper combination of phrases to make the game progress any further. Dig hole, drop gold, then fill hole. This caused the screen to display, "Congratulations, 40.24248. -121.4434. Upon which the game ceased to accept commands, requiring the user to reboot one last time. After some deliberation, Nevins came to the conclusion that the numbers referred to lines of latitude and longitude. The coordinates led to a point in the sprawling forest that dominated the nearby Lassen Volcanic Park. As he possessed much more free time than sense, Nevins vowed to see Pale Luna through to its ending. The next day, armed with a map, a compass and a shovel, he navigated the park's trails, noting with amusement how each turn he made corresponded roughly to those that he took in the game. Though he initially regretted bringing the compass and digging tool on a mere hunch, the path's similarity all but confirmed his suspicions that the journey would end him face to face with an eccentric's buried treasure. Out of breath after a tricky struggle to the coordinates, he was pleasantly surprised by a literal stumble on a patch of uneven dirt. Shoveling as excitedly as he was, it would be an understatement to say that he was taken aback when his heavy strokes unearthed the badly decomposing head of a blonde-haired little girl. Nevins promptly reported the situation to the authorities. The girl was identified as Karen Paulson, 11, reported as missing to the San Diego Police Department a year and a half prior. Efforts were made to track down the programmer of Pale Luna, but the nearly anonymous legal grey area in which the software swapping community operated inescapably led to many dead ends. Collectors have been known to offer upwards of 6 figures for an authentic copy of the game. The rest of Karen's body was never found. Hey, quickly before you go, I wanted to announce that we've just reached 1,000 subscribers. So, what I'm going to be doing is, this Sunday coming up, I'm going to be doing a 1,000 subscriber Q&A and live narration stream, which means for the first time ever, I'm going to be trying these live. So expect a lot of mess ups. So that'll be happening 9 PM GMT. So, there's going to be a link in the card above, and that should show you where the live stream will be hosted. That way you can have it ready. It'll also show you exactly how long until the live stream from today. But regardless, thank you all for subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Take care. Thank you for listening to the end. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to click that like button, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon to make sure you never miss a story.